Hello, everyone. This is Gene Geog History. For the last several weeks, I've been breaking down several different regions of the world as a region from an anthropological, ethnic, and potentially racial area/lens, and I'm going to continue doing that with the Middle East or Western Asia, or West Asia, whatever term you prefer. So this area is one of the most difficult regions to fit into modern racial categories because it sits at a crossroads of Africa, Europe, Central Asia, and South Asia. Anthropologically, historically, and genetically, it is less a single quote unquote race than a zone of continuous interaction amongst many populations. So, geographically, West Asia generally includes Turkey, Cyprus, Syria, Lebanon, Israel/Palestine, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Oman, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Iran, and some definitions also include the South Caucasus. There are major ethno-linguistic groups as it's not a homogeneous area. So the first group is the Arabs, as they form the largest ethno-linguistic group. However, quote-unquote Arab primarily refers to the language and cultural identity rather than ancestry. A person from Lebanon, Iraq, Yemen, and Saudi Arabia may all identify as Arab while possessing somewhat different genetic backgrounds. Then we have the Iranians, so this includes the Persians and others. Iran contains Persians, Azeris, Kurds, Lurs, Balak, Arabs, and Turkmen, where Iranians generally represent a different population cluster from Arabs, though with substantial overlap. And historically, Iranian people are associated with Indo-Iranian languages. Then we have Turks. So modern Turks emerged from a mixture of indigenous Anatolian populations, ancient Greeks, Armenians, Caucasian groups, Central Asian Turkic migration or migrants. Despite speaking a Turkic language, modern Turks are genetically much closer to neighboring Mediterranean and West Asian populations than to Central Asians. Then we have the Kurds, and the Kurdish population spans Turkey, Iraq, Syria, and Iran. Kurds are generally considered an Iranian speaking people with a distinct identity from both Arabs and Turks. So, regarding the historical layers, the region has accumulated ancestry from many periods. So, regarding ancient Near Eastern farmers, the first agricultural civilizations emerged in Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Levant. Much of modern West Asian ancestry descends from these early farming populations. The Bronze Age civilizations. So, major civilizations included the Sumer, the Akkad, Babylonia, Assyria, Phoenicia, and Elam. Then there's the Indo-European expansion, where Iranian peoples entered parts of the region during the first millennium BCE. Then we have the Arab expansion. So the spread of Arabic language and culture after the rise of Islam transformed much of the region culturally, though not necessarily through complete population replacement. Then there's the Turkic expansion. So the Turkic migrations reshaped Anatolia and parts of the Middle East, beginning around the 11th century. So historically, Middle Eastern societies did not organize people primarily through modern Western racial categories. Instead, distinctions often centered on tribe, religion, language, region, family lineage, and urban versus rural origins. So, for example, a Sunni Arab from Damascus might historically perceive differently through religion, clan, or locality before thinking in terms of race. Now we're at the part where I want to talk about why they and their descendants are grouped together today. So, one of them is due to the geographic grouping, essentially. So, the simplest reason is that these populations originate from neighboring regions connected by geography. So, the Middle East/West Asia forms a relatively continuous zone stretching from Anatolia, which is modern day Turkey, the Levant, which is the modern day Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, and Israel, Mesopotamia, which is the modern day Iraq, the Arabian Peninsula, and Iran. For thousands of years, populations moved, traded, intermarried, fought wars, and shared cultural influences across this space. As a result, these are often gradual transitions rather than sharp biological boundaries. Another one is their shared historical civilizations. So many populations of the region participated in overlapping historical worlds. So some share Major historical frameworks, which included the ancient Near Eastern civilization, Hellenistic influences after Alexander the Great, Roman and Byzantine rule, the Islamic civilization, the Ottoman rule, and the Persian imperial system. Third reason is linguistic and cultural networks. So while there are several language families in the region, i.e. Arabic, which is Semitic, Persian/Farsi, which is Indo-European, Kurdish, which is Indo-European, Turkish, which is Turkic, Armenian, which is Indo-European, and Hebrew, which is Semitic, these groups developed long-standing cultural exchanges. Common features often include similar cuisines, family structures, related religious histories, shared and architectural traditions, comparable social norms regarding kinship and hospitality. This creates a recognizable regional culture despite ethnic diversity. Another is migration and diaspora grouping. So essentially, what happened after migration to Europe and the Americas is why these are grouped together. So when immigrants arrived from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, Armenia, Turkey, and Iran to the West, outsiders often perceived them as belonging to a similar foreign region. So, in countries like the United States and Canada, people from these different backgrounds will frequently live together as either Middle Eastern, Near Eastern, historically Oriental, often incorrectly Arab. Over time, external classifications helped broader regional identities. The fifth reason is the development of modern racial categories. So, modern racial systems were largely developed in Europe and in the Americas. Historically, European racial thinkers often divided humanity into broad continental groups such as Europeans, Africans, East Asians, and Native Americans. Middle Eastern people didn't really fit neatly into any of these categories. As a result, they were often placed in a broad quote unquote Caucasian category. The term Caucasian itself originated because early racial theorists believed these people of the Caucasus and surrounding regions represented an idealized and the most beautiful human type. Ironically, this category eventually became so broad that it included people from Ireland, Lebanon, Iran, Armenia, and parts of India, despite huge, enormous differences among them. The sixth reason is the shared genetic origins to a degree. So, anthropologically, many Middle Eastern populations descend significantly from ancient populations that lived in the Levant, Mesopotamia, Anatolia, and Iran. These ancient populations were related, but not identical. Iranians often form a somewhat separate branch towards the Caucasus and South Asia on a PCA plot. The important point is that Middle Eastern populations genetically cluster closer to one another than they do Eastern Asians, Sub-Saharan Africans, or Native Americans. This doesn't make them a single population, but it helps explain why anthropologists often discuss them as a regional grouping. So the seventh reason is religion. Really, the Middle East is the birthplace of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Even communities that differ ethnically often share religious histories and traditions that develop within the same regional environment. But I think that this area is mainly known for Islam compared to the two other Abrahamic religions, and that's one of the reasons why they are grouped together today. And why do the descendants remain grouped together? So, in countries like Canada, the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, and even many other countries in Europe, descendants often remain grouped together because 1. They are viewed together through a similar racial lens. 2. They may share immigration histories. 3. They often face the similar stereotypes. 4. They may participate in overlapping community organizations. And 5. Government agencies frequently use the umbrella categories such as Middle Eastern or MENA, which references Middle Eastern and North African. Okay, so we're going to do a brief, or I'm going to attempt to make a brief timeline of Middle Eastern and West Asians. So the first one is before 50,000 BCE, essentially early humans. So modern humans likely passed to Southwest Asia after leaving Africa. So that would be their first destination after leaving Africa, essentially. So key migration corridors included southern Arabia and the Sinai and the Levant. The Levant became one of humanity's first major crossroads between Africa and Eurasia. Then we have 50,000 to 12,000 BCE, which is hunter-gatherer West Asia. So different populations occupied Anatolia, which is now modern-day Turkey, the Levant, Mesopotamia, the Iranian Plateau, and Arabia, and these groups were not identical under the slightest. Ancient DNA suggests several distinct populations already existed, like the Anatolian hunter-gatherers, the Levantine hunter-gatherers, and Iranian hunter-gatherers. And many modern West Asians still carry ancestry from all three groups to varying degrees. Now we're moving on from 12,000 to 7,000 BCE. So this is the agricultural revolution. This may be the single most important period in West Asian history. The first large-scale farming societies emerged in southern Anatolia, the Levant, and northern Mesopotamia. Important sites include Göbekli Tepe, Jericho, and Çatalhöyük. Apologies for mispronouncing them, as I'm sure I did. These early farmers would eventually contribute ancestry to much of Europe, North Africa, and South Asia. So this is kind of the base for that Caucasus group, essentially. 7,000 to 3,500 BCE. So this is the formation of regional populations. So by this period, recognizable ancestral populations emerged, like the Anatolian populations, as these are the ancestors of many later peoples of Anatolia, the Levantine populations, so these are the ancestors of groups that eventually gave rise to Kenites, Phoenicians, Israelites, and other Levantine people, and the Iranian plateau populations, which are ancestors of many later Iranian-speaking groups, and the final is Arabian populations, so ancestors of later Arabian peoples. So this region was already ethnically diverse. Now we're moving on to 3500 to 1200 BCE. So this is the Bronze Age civilizations. So the first major civilizations appeared. So we had Mesopotamia, which include the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians. The Levant had the Kenites and the Phoenicians. Anatolia had the Hittites, and Iran had Elamites. So many modern populations show partial continuity with these ancient groups. We now have 1200 to 500 BCE. So this is the Iron Age transformations. Several populations familiar today began emerging. So we had the Israelites as ancestors of later Jewish populations developed in the southern Levant. Arameans or Aramic spread throughout much of the Near East. Early Iranian-speaking peoples moved into the Iranian plateau, and these included ancestors of Persians and Medes. This period helped establish the foundation of modern Iran. Now we're moving on to the Persian empires, which is from 550 to 330 BCE. So the Achaemenid Empire united enormous portions of West Asia during this period. For the first time, populations from Egypt, Anatolia, Mesopotamia, Iran, and the Levant were integrated into a single imperial system. Then from 330 BCE to 600 CE, we have the Greek, Roman, and the Persian eras. So after the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek influence spread widely. Cities became increasingly cosmopolitan, local populations remained largely in place. Major powers included the Seleucid Empire, the Roman Empire, the Parthian Empire, and the Sasanian Empire. Christianity emerged during this era and spread across much of the region. Now we have 600 to 900 CE. This is the rise of Islam and the Arab expansion. This is one of the most transformative periods. The emergence of Islam in Arabia led to rapid political expansion. Arabic languages and culture spread throughout Syria, Iraq, Egypt, and North Africa. Importantly, Arabization was often more cultural and linguistic than biological. Many modern Arabs descend largely from populations that were already living in those areas before Arabic spread. So now we are from 900 to 1500 CE. So this is the medieval Middle East. The region became one of the world's major centers of science, philosophy, medicine, and trade. New influences arrived from the Turkic migrations, so the ancestors of modern Turks entered Anatolia, and the Mongol invasion. So some Central Asian ancestry emerged in parts of Iran, Iraq, and Anatolia. So while this is happening, we also have the emergence of modern Turks, which is from 1000 to 1500 CE. So this is one of the biggest demographic transformations that occurred in Anatolia. Before this period, Anatolia was populated largely by Greeks, Armenians, Anatolian populations. After the Turkic migrations and centuries of cultural change, the foundation of modern Turkish identity emerged. while the Turks remain primarily descended from the local Anatolian populations, with a smaller but significant Central Asian contribution. Now we're moving from 1500 to 1900. So this is the Ottoman and the Safavid eras. Two major powers dominated. So we have the Ottoman Empire, which controlled Anatolia, the Levant, Iraq, Arabia, and the Balkans, and the Safavid Empire, which helped solidify modern Iranian identity and Shia Islam in Iran. Many of today's political and sectarian divisions trace back to this era. So essentially, this is happening in the same time. The Safavid, mainly just Iran, and everywhere else in this region was the Ottoman Empire, pretty much. Now we're moving on to 1900 to the present day. So this is the modern nation states that we have now. So the collapse of the Ottoman Empire created many modern states like Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. National identities increasingly became Arab, Turkish, Iranian, Kurdish, Armenian, and Jewish, rather than primarily imperial or tribal. So now we're at the part where we talk about the average phenotype of the West Asian slash Middle Easterner person. So one thing that I'd like to get clear at every video that I'm at this part is that there's no single average Middle Eastern phenotype because West Asia spans a huge area from the Mediterranean coast to the Iranian Plateau and from the Caucasus to southern Arabia. The variation within the region is comparable to the variation you see across Europe or Latin America. That said, if you had to create a rough central tendency for the region as a whole, it would most likely resemble someone from northern Levant to the northern Mesopotamia, since these are the areas that are essentially in the middle of many West Asian genetic and geographic lines or areas. So if we were to create a general West Asian phenotype, or the average in general, it would often include light olive to medium brown skin, dark brown hair, brown eyes, wavy to straight hair texture, moderate facial hair growth in males, medium facial features, neither extremely narrow or extremely broad, a prominent but highly variable nose shape, and average stature by global standards. And this is a reference to height. However, there are different variety when it comes to this average phenotype depending on the area. So regarding the Eastern Mediterranean slash Levant, the characteristics when it comes to the average phenotype is often by olive skin, dark hair, brown eyes, occasionally lighter eyes, i.e. hazel, green, or blue, and modern facial breadth. So in Anatolia and Turkey, there is some of the widest variation here, especially with Anatolia is Turkey, so I don't know why that was separated. So common traits include light olive to fair skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, but blue eyes are relatively common, green eyes occur regularly, and blonde hair exists at noticeable frequencies. This reflects Anatolia's long history as a crossroads between Europe, the Caucasus, and West Asia. Then there's Iran and the Iranian Plateau. The typical characteristics there are light olive to medium skin, dark hair, and brown eyes, though Iran does have notable frequencies of green eyes, hazel eyes, and fair skin. The Iranian Plateau historically received influences from both West Eurasian and Central Asian populations. And then there's Arabia, i.e., the Arabian Peninsula, and the area there tends to show medium to dark olive skin, dark hair, and brown eyes. Southern Arabia, especially Yemen and Oman, often show somewhat darker average pigmentation than the Levant or Anatolia due to geography and historical gene flow with the neighboring regions, especially with the Horn of Africa and South Asia. So now we're at the final section of the video where I like to break down the area that I'm referencing in regards to the hierarchy of whiteness or just race overall when it comes to the relationship with race. So the first thing that needs to be acknowledged is that it's a social construct with historical context, not a biological one, and essentially Middle Eastern and West Asian people have occupied an ambiguous position within it for centuries. So they have been often positioned as conditionally white, borderline white, or racially in between in many Western racial systems. Their relationship to whiteness has shifted over time by country, religion, appearance, nationality, and political circumstance. So, before the modern race, essentially, identities were often based on religion, tribe, language, city or region, family lineage, and social class. So, with the creation of whiteness, which Europeans developed, modern racial classifications between the 17th and 19th centuries were attempting to divide humanity into larger continental groups. So, this was an issue with Middle Eastern populations because they shared many physical traits with Europeans, i.e., the same phenotype on average. They lived outside of Europe, had ancient civilizations older than most of Europe because Europeans descended from them, and they occupied a geographic bridge between continents. Many racial theorists ultimately classified most Middle Eastern people as a part of the broad Caucasian or Caucasoid category. Ironically, the term Caucasian itself comes from the Caucasus region, which sits between Europe and West Asia. So, regarding whiteness in North America, specifically in the United States, immigrants from Lebanon, Syria, Palestine, and Armenia, so the Caucasus and the Levant, fought court battles in the early 20th century to be legally recognized as white because citizenship laws favored free white persons. Many courts eventually ruled that these groups were legally white. This created a distinction between legal whiteness and social whiteness. The middle position. So here's another element. Historically, Middle Easterners in Western countries have often occupied a position similar to Southern Europeans in the early 1900s when it comes to conditional whiteness, some Latin American populations, and certain North African populations, meaning they're often seen as not fully outside of whiteness, but not fully inside whiteness because they're essentially one, they have a tiny bit of admixture that some purists freak out over. This is sometimes described by scholars as a liminal or in between racial position. So there are factors that affect this perception. And the biggest one, obviously, in my opinion, and just from data, is religion. So a Christian Lebanese immigrant historically had an easier path to social acceptance in many Western countries than a Muslim immigrant from the same region. Religion often shaped perceptions as much as ancestry. So pretty much, if you are a Muslim, you're seen as non-white. So you could be from the same area. And if you're a Christian, because Christian is somehow tied to whiteness, they view you as white. And I do think this is the biggest layer or element, in my opinion. When it comes to the national origin, perceptions vary significantly between Turkish, Iranian, Lebanese, Saudi, Yemeni, and Iraqi identities. When it comes to appearance, some West Asians are frequently mistaken for Southern Europeans, specifically Greeks, Italians, and Spaniards, while others may be perceived as North African, South Asian, mixed race, and generally Middle Eastern, i.e., the same family can contain individuals who are read differently by outsiders. And then the obvious layer that I do have to address is the post 9/11 era. So, after the attacks on September 11th, 2001, many Middle Eastern and Muslim communities in North America and Europe experienced increased racialization. Groups that had previously been considered broadly white in legal terms were increasingly treated as a distinct category. Many scholars argue that this period accelerated the emergence of Middle Eastern as a racialized identity in public discourse. And then there's how Middle Easterners see themselves. So some see themselves as white, others see themselves as Middle Eastern. They can see themselves as Arab, Persian, Turkish, Kurdish, Armenian, or a mix, while others reject racial labels altogether and emphasize ethnicity, nationality, or region. And religion. And that concludes my coverage of not only the Middle Eastern and West Asian region, but the Caucasoid or West Eurasian group, though there might be two others that are kind of considered it too, but not compared to the others. So we moved on from one region, which is West Eurasia, and then I'm thinking about either doing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth between Sub-Saharan Africa and East Eurasia, or maybe I'll just focus on one area first, then the next. So this was pretty fun. I'm looking forward into getting into other areas. and breaking them down, talking about their history, their relationship today, and how they're seen today, and all of that jazz. So thank you all for watching, and I'll be back with more content soon. Take care.